The idea for this talk came about because my blog, thomascwaters.com, began after Podcamp in 2008. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of take a look at how this blog has grown, how it's succeeded, and where it hasn't, in a format that allows for people to learn from that. Now, I came to Podcamp in 2008 because I was producing a podcast called A Queer Look at the Bible. And I was really unhappy with how it was doing, because I had no idea how it was doing. I was producing it, it was on iTunes, I had no idea if people were downloading it, if they were listening to it, and I was in the dark. And I thought, this isn't working for me, and so I'm going to come to Podcamp and I'm going to learn some things that are going to help me do my podcast better. And lo and behold, I came to Podcamp in 2008, and I stopped doing my podcast, and I started blogging. And it has both succeeded and not succeeded. This is who I am. You can get links to everything that I do at about.me, TC Waters, and these slides will be there too. My link to my slide share is up there, and I'll put these up after I leave today. It's my Twitter account and my email. But I want to specifically talk about this website, thomascwaters.com, today. It seems to me, and I've come to Podcamp every year since then, except for last year, and I was ill and I didn't get here. And I have a little bit of a cough today, so bear with me. I have a problem with my lungs, and the fall is just a rough time for me. Last year I got sick, and this year I'm working really hard not to. There's a lot of good information for people who are just kind of getting started. But after you get started, you've got to keep going. And how do you do that? And how do you not get discouraged and think, why am I not doing better than I'm doing? What kind of information is there to help keep that going? So I wanted to kind of bring some of that out in a case study by looking at my own work. I'm going to talk about three kinds of things. Some of the technical stuff, a lot about content, but I also want to talk a little bit about what does it mean to be a blogger, or whatever kind of medium you work in. This could be podcasting as a lifestyle, or whatever. It's kind of unimportant, but blogging is the tool that has been working for me, and I'll talk a little bit about why that is. I believe that there's lots of reasons to blog, and I don't think any of them are more valid or less valid. You will find a lot of people here that blog because it's a part of a content marketing setup, and that's all good and fine. You can find people out there that talk about converting and all of that stuff, but I'm not that. That doesn't work for me. And you can blog because it's about news and journalism. The internet becomes a new place to publish, and that's very important stuff. I was just listening to part of the session on social media and traditional media, and there are really great things in there. My blog falls more into this third category, opinion editorial. I believe that one of the things that we lack in today's media world is we need more people having real dialogue about things. We've got all these sound bites out there, but we don't have people actually talking back and forth about real ideas. And that's one of the things I want to accomplish with my blog, is how do I put ideas out there that prompt people to have dialogue and discourse. I also think a personal voice diary type blogs are really important. These might be mommy blogs or daddy blogs or whatever. A really valid and important kind of blogging that can go on. And then another kind of blogging that I want to talk about a little bit is this notion of community building and educational. And I think one of the things that I've been going through as a blogger is I've been realizing how my blog is beginning to shift from being all opinion editorial to being kind of educational. So for example, a big story and my blog is a lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer blog, but I don't think that's really, no matter what your topic is, I think the things I'm going to talk about are going to be applicable. But a big story in my community is about the upcoming Winter Olympics in Russia, and Russia's new anti-gay propaganda law. There's a lot of stuff being said about that, which isn't really either true or it doesn't get to the meat of the issue. And so what I've been trying to blog about is I want to try to help educate people about why the issues are important, what do they mean, what don't they mean, how do we get past some of the hype to the stuff underneath. Two blogs that are aspirational blogs for me, The Dish, Andrew Sullivan. If I grow up, I want to be like Andrew Sullivan in a big way. Or John Aravosa said America Blog. And I point those out because if you blog or whatever you do you have podcasts or blogs or people that are doing what you want to be doing? Do you have people that you aspire to be like? And if you don't, get some, because that can help you then figure out where are you at in meeting what you're trying to do. So where all of this began, back in about 2002, 2004, I was doing some kind of diary type blogging about what it was just for me to be who I was and the things that I was doing. None of that stuff exists anymore. It was all in platforms that have kind of come and gone. It wasn't easily captured or saved and so on. And then I began doing this Queer Look at the Bible podcast. And the idea of the podcast grew out of an art, a performance art project. I would see these preachers out on street corners, and I wondered what would it be like if there was a gay street corner preacher who was preaching from that Bible as if it were a gay positive book. And I wondered what the crowd would do, or passerbys would do, when they start hearing this street preacher saying the exact opposite of what we usually expect from a street preacher. And so that's where that podcast came about. And I have a small stint in my past as a lay preacher within the Methodist Church. And so I did a Sunday kind of sermon, and I put it out there. And that was on iTunes 2006, 2007, and I got really frustrated with it. I didn't know, was anybody listening? Did anybody like it? And one thing I've learned is you can't do what you're doing because of people either listening or liking it. If you have one listener or you have 10,000 listeners, you got to do it because it's what you need to be doing. Nonetheless, I took all that old stuff down, much of it which was pretty bad. There's a few things left up there on iTunes that were put back up in 2009. Came to Podcamp, I already told you that. Out of that grew two URLs. QLATB.com, the Queer Look at the Bible, but I also started ThomasCWaters.com. I did that having some discussions with people here, and I did ThomasCWaters.com just as a place to learn how to use WordPress. So I was going to figure out how to use WordPress and then use WordPress for my podcast. But then something happened. I went away on vacation, and I was on vacation over Election Day. 2008 was a big election year. President Obama won. Prop 8 passed in California. I was away at a gay resort, where there were about 2,000 gay men on the beach in Puerto Vallarta. And actually on Election Day, we were all in the bar where there were these huge TV screens up all around, paying attention to all the results coming in and so on. It was very exciting and troubling and so on. And as Prop 8 passed, I was just astounded. And I went back up to my room and I started to write about it because I needed some avenue to get some stuff out. And ThomasCWaters.com became a blog because of that experience. And I've been blogging ever since. So here are my stats from the very first year. And I'm counting years in this presentation, going from about the 1st of September every year to the 1st of September of the next year. So this is 2008 to 2009. I had, just a little bit over 4,000 visitors, a little bit over almost 7,000 page views. Not huge, not teeny. In these early days, my topics and the content that I was writing about was anything LGBT that I could blog about. I was blogging, posting sometimes 8 and 9 things a day. John Carmen used to say I was the most prolific blogger he ever knew. And most of that's because I would find a news story via Twitter usually. I would write 2 or 3 sentences about it with a link, and that's what I was putting up. And I found that the more things I put up, the more visitors I had, so I was going that route. But I just felt like I was a a production tool. I wasn't really doing anything that was important to me. My blog design was a free WordPress theme called that, and it worked for me. It worked fine until I noticed some other blogs had it too. And that's when I made a switch. My expectations were that I had important things to say and everybody needed to know them. And everybody wanted to know them. The crowd out there was just waiting for my voice to become available to them. And guess what? That really isn't the case at all. It wasn't really a shocker. But I truly did go into it thinking, I'm going to start writing this stuff and people are going to think it's amazing. Social media for me at this time, I was heavy user of Twitter. I was not a user of Facebook. I had a Facebook account, but I didn't really use it. But I was a heavy-duty user of Twitter. I got to Twitter because I use Second Life in my day job, which is in education. And somebody at Second Life in a users group had talked about Twitter, and I got hooked on Twitter. But I wanted to put up some stats there. Look at that bounce rate, 74%. Really, really, really bad. Your bounce rate is that number that tells you how many people come to your site and then take off right away. So most people are coming to my site and then leaving, not hanging around. Although, average duration, 1 minute 35 seconds, that's not too bad. So some of my numbers aren't so bad there. About a page and a half while they're there, that's not too bad. Now, the stats that I'm showing up here are comparing the current year with the previous year. So this shows the 2009 stats to the 2008 stats. And I did really well in my second year of blogging. My visits went from a little bit over 4,000 to about 13,000. My page views went from about almost 7,000 to almost 20,000. My bounce rate started to come down a little bit. My new visits were going up. That stuff looks good, doesn't it? My content, I started to be a little bit more particular about what I was writing about. I started to make sure I was actually writing more instead of just republishing things I was seeing from other people. I have one post in particular I want to bring up here. In my second year, it's the only blog post I've ever written since this started that I kind of regret publishing. And I don't think that's too bad. I've published something like 2,000 blog posts, and to only have one that I really regret, that's not too bad. I believe that when you write something, you got to be ready to stand behind it. Even if it's crap, or even if you are wrong, you have to own that you did it. And I own that I did this one, and I kind of wish I hadn't. It raised all kinds of controversy. And some of that was justified, some of it not. It wasn't so much in this blog post I was saying terrible things. I wasn't. I asked really important questions. But what I didn't do was put those questions in a context that they could actually be heard by my viewers. And so I asked questions, and I wrote it in such a way that it just pissed people off. People got defensive, and then nothing I had to say got through. So I kind of ended up standing in my own way, in a big way. And there was a real learning lesson in that for me. And I got the day I posted it, I got a phone call within a few hours. A very wonderful friend of mine, and by the way, the Dyke March is a Dyke and Trans March. And a lesbian friend of mine called me up. She says, "What are you doing saying anything about the Dykes? Don't you know better?" And I guess I didn't. But I hung in there. I hung in there through all the comments, through all the controversy, and I learned from that lesson. And I fortunately had good people reminding me, "Tom, you're asking some important questions. Think about how you ask them if you really want them to make a difference." My blog design changed. I bought a theme from Plexi Themes. It's called The News. It's one I'm still using, although that's about to change, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little later on. My expectations were changing, and that Dyke March had a lot to do with it, but throughout all of it, it was, why am I really saying all this stuff? Why am I pouring this time into my writing? And no longer did I think I was just going to write things and everybody thought they were wonderful, but I thought that there were things that were missing out in the world that needed to be said. And how could I bring those, at least my perspective on them? My social media began to change in a big way. I started using Facebook, and that has a lot to do with why those numbers are so far up. Because Facebook was a place where lots of people were. And so I started to be publicizing what I was doing, and that made those jump up pretty nice. Now, after the second year, you're going to find my numbers haven't changed, all that significantly. And I don't know whether I would call this good or bad. I've been at this about 14,000 visits. I've been somewhere between 20 and 35,000 page views every year since then. And I guess, it's a glass half full, half empty. If you tell me that, I can say, aren't those numbers great? I can also look at that and think those numbers are shit. So I don't know. And I come to Podcamp and I hear people talk about what they do, but you never really see those numbers, do you? Because that stuff we kind of keep hidden. Well, I'm putting it out there. One of the things I want to point out is those analytics are really useful to you in you doing your job. But past that, they don't really mean a whole lot. In my earliest days of blogging, I was checking my Google Analytics every single day. Maybe sometimes several times a day, even though I knew they wouldn't be changing. And I don't do that anymore. Now, maybe every couple of weeks or so on, I might look at my Google Analytics, but I don't do that like I once did. Because the numbers aren't the big deal, except when you stop and think about what are your expectations.
Yeah.
If your expectation is that many, many people are reading or listening or watching what you do, then you need to be paying attention because you need to know what's going on. But if you're blogging, podcasting, video, whatever, because you have something you've got to get out, those numbers, you can kind of ignore them to some degree. I also started something this year, and I put it under blog design because it was a way to kind of supplement what I was doing. I had gone to a talk about Blog Talk Radio at another podcamp, I think in Columbus or Cleveland or whatever. And I thought, I'm going to start adding some podcasting back in. So I started using Blog Talk Radio because it's easy to use. And I still like it. It's still really easy to use. But I found that it really didn't do anything to my numbers for my blog. And the numbers of people tuning into it were really pretty low. My expectations during my third year was that I just had to keep growing my blog. It needed to be something that allowed me to justify the time that was going into this. Social media really wasn't changing for me. I kept doing all the things I was doing. Then the fourth year. My fourth year was a real banner year for me. I went from just a little 13,500 to over 15,000 visits, and I jumped to almost 77.1 thousand page views. So it was a really good year for me that way. My bounce rate went way down to 21% from way up at 77%. I started doing things that were really starting to work. I was getting people to the blog. They were seeing the content that was important to them, that I wanted them to see. I won in the fall or December of that year an award called a Beacons of Equality Award. And what that did for me, it had something to do with why those page views were way up. But the other thing it really did for me was it made me stop and ask myself, what was I trying to accomplish and why was I trying to accomplish it? And there's a truth underneath all of this. Now, I blog on my own time. I have a daytime job. I love my job. But the reality is, if I'm honest, I'd be happy blogging 24/7. I really would. to do that, my blog has to be able to support me and my family. So I can say, although it's kind of BS, that I don't care whether my blog makes money, because I have a job to give me money. This is important work, and I'm glad I'm doing it. Well, guess what? The reality is, if I don't own that I just like to be blogging, I will never get to the point where my blog can support me. And when I get to the 5th year, I'll say a little bit more about that. Social media started to really change for me. I'm about 1,300, 1,350 followers on Twitter. People that follow me, I follow about 900 people. Twitter is pretty useless when you follow that many people. So I started to reorganize people into lists, and I looked at Google+, but I have not yet really gotten engaged in Google+. Because when you're following too many people, you just have such a stream of stuff, and it's going so fast, you can capture a few things out of it, but it's not very useful to you, not really. In the early days, back in that like year 1 and year 2, I would post something, I would publish that to Twitter that I had put out a post, and I would get a half dozen or a dozen retweets to that really easily. That stopped happening, and I didn't know why it wasn't happening for a while. It was happening because everybody was there was so much noise on Twitter. Everybody was kind of overloaded that Twitter stopped being a really useful tool for publicizing what I was doing. My emphasis on SEO really began to change at this point. And one of the things that I got because of winning this award was I got a number of hours of PR assistance. I had somebody that worked with me for about 6 hours, and they helped me do some things with my blog that I had been unaware of. And come on in. You come in, Norm. We'll have you.
I'm just poking my head around.
And many of them were very, very simple things that I had been missing. And I think one of the takeaway messages that I would want to bring is, if you're a blogger or a podcaster or a video person, whatever, you can't be afraid of the technology. Even if you're not an uber geek, there's some geeky stuff you've got to be willing to start to learn and pay attention to, because it will make all the difference in the world. This emphasis on SEO has everything to do with those page views jumping from a little bit over 18,000 to 77,000. Because I started doing things in the way I published my posts that allowed that stuff to reach the audience. Now, this may not be applicable to every community, but in the lesbian, gay, bi, and trans community, there are a lot of people that are frustrated and feel they have something they want to say. And when they're not heard, they even feel more frustrated. Well, as a blogger, you could be writing the greatest stuff in the world, but if you're not doing things that help it get captured such that other people are going to find it, you might as well be talking to yourself inside a broom closet. So that stuff is very, very important. And one of the things that was a problem for me was, I thought, I'm not enough of a geek. I can't learn that stuff. That's why I want to use WordPress, so I don't have to know that stuff. Well, guess what? You gotta kind of pay attention to it. So this is my 5th year. I'm coming off that big quality award, and I feel really great about what I'm doing. And guess what? My numbers go back down. I had gone up to about a little bit over 15,000 visits and down to 13,500. My page views dropped, not as bad as they were before, but now when I did these stats, 44,000. The only thing that really continued to improve was my bounce rate. And what that said was, fewer people were getting to my site and leaving immediately. So, I was still doing a better job of writing content that was attracting people. I just wasn't attracting as many people anymore. Now, one of the keys behind that is, I took almost the entire month of August off this year. I published probably 3 or 4 posts in the whole month, when usually I publish that in less than a week. And a lot of that grew out of the fact that I was just getting tired. I needed a break. And so if I had published more in August, those numbers would probably be up to where they were in the previous year, but they wouldn't be higher. My content choices continue to do what they had been doing. I started to become more and more focused on a few things. So I've written a whole lot about the Sochi Olympics and the anti-gay propaganda law in Russia. My blog design, the thing I stuck there is I started something back in the springtime, which was a weekly newsletter, an email newsletter. And, you know, I have struggled all year long thinking, why am I doing this? Am I really accomplishing what I need to accomplish? So I saw all this stuff online that said, you know, if you have an email newsletter, that'll bring people to your blog, right? Well, so I started this. And every Thursday night, I would pull together all the LGBT-related news stories for the week, write a simple e-newsletter, and send it out. And it's really effective and successful to the people that are reading it. I get so many positive comments from people saying, I'm so glad you put all that in a single email and that I get it in my email box. But the number of people that are actually subscribed to it are really, really, really teeny. So that I took a break from that in August, and I haven't actually started it back up. And I'm trying to figure out what I really want to do with it. My expectations during this 5th year is I really had to come to terms with the fact that I really would like to be blogging full time. I love my day job, but if I could make my dream job what it is, I would be a blogger. And that means I have to be able to monetize, and I'm not doing the things that it takes to get there. Those numbers have pretty much stayed the same since year 2, other than some really nice numbers in that 4th year. Social media, I wanted to give up on social media in this year. And I already alluded to the fact that I think Twitter has kind of become less useful. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a second here. So there's 5 years of blogging. I started off really slow. My 2nd year I got to a level. That level stayed pretty much the same throughout in terms of visitors and page views. Some things have improved, but I haven't continued to an upward growth. I found a bunch of strengths to what I do. I have a consistent voice. I am focused on my content is focused, and it remains topical. I talk about the things that matter now. I'm very equal opportunity with my opinions. I find fault with people and groups a lot, and I do that to everybody. So John Arvosis, who even though he's one of my aspiration bloggers, he's been writing recently about how the community has harmed itself by continuing to talk about the LGBTQ community. He thinks we should just be the gay community. Well, of course he should. He's a white male. I've never heard a lesbian say we should be referring to ourselves as the gay community. I've never heard a trans person say that. So I took him to task over that statement. And just like I talked about the Dyke March, I'm happy to put my opinions out there, but I treat everybody the same. If there's something I disagree with, I say it, but I'm not biased towards any one or another. My site is not a clone of other sites. There are other LGBT sites out there, but I'm not like them, and that's a strength of mine. My content goes deeper. I write long posts. A normal blog post for me is 700 to 900 words. And I have people read my whole blog posts. And I'm not a cheerleader blog. Now, cheerleader blogs are the blogs that just say what people want you to hear. Like, if I just said, same-sex marriage is important, period. Well, fine. Lots of other people have said that. I don't need to be a cheerleader for a cause. What I want to write about is the whys it's important, what are the things that are standing in the way. I want to get deeper than the cheerleading, rah, rah, rah stuff. But here are some of my weaknesses that I've discovered as I work. My biggest number one weakness is spelling. Now, I'm not a good typist. If you believe that you can blog and not worry about spelling, you are crazy. And this becomes important for a number of reasons. The most obvious is that if you're saying things that are controversial or that push people, and you misspell things, they have more trouble believing you, or that becomes a reason why they disagree with you. So spelling is critically important. The second way it really impacts is in your work process, in your workflow. So I ride a bus to work every day. That bus ride would be a good time for me to work on my blog post on my iPad. However, on an iPad, there is no such thing as spell check other than, words get a little red underline, and that's really easy to miss. It's not a workflow that lends itself to being spell check proof. So since spelling is so important, you've got to find a way to make your workflow be such that the two will fit together pretty well. And that's one of the things that I've been struggling with. I'm a little bit overextended. So even if on the bus is the right time for me to work on a blog post, it's the wrong time for that blog post to become finished. I used to get up and blog in the morning between about 5:30 and 6:30, and then I would go to the gym and then I would go to work. And that was working for me for a long time. I stopped doing that, however. And so now if I come home at the end of the day and I feel tired and I don't get to it, and that it interferes with my writing. So since spelling is so critically important, and since I'm overextended, the solution is to get less overextended, cut some things out. Really pay attention to how you're using your time and what your workflow is. I forget to be fearless sometimes. I get hung up in what will people say. And I don't need to do that. When I write what I really want to write, I get lots of good support and good feedback, even if I get a lot of controversy. So if I forget to be fearless, I can slow down on my posting. When I remember to be fearless, I am happy with who I am and what I'm doing, and my readers are too. I failed to do adequate marketing. Part of why my numbers haven't gone up is because I'm not doing enough to make sure that I reach new people. The people that read my blog come back over and over and over again, but I'm not getting out to new people. And if you're only talking to a small audience, maybe that works for you, but I want to reach a bigger audience, so I've got to do better marketing. I don't do enough editing on my blog posts. So it's okay to write long ones, but I could probably do a better job of having better blog posts if I do more time and edit them down a little bit more. And I also fail to use keywords and key phrases in my content itself. And that's a workflow problem. I'm really good at making sure I title things with keywords, using keywords to name photographs and in other ways, my tags and so on. But in the blog post itself, I struggle with that, especially keyword phrases. Actual keywords are easy. But a keyword like same-sex marriage isn't a very good keyword. It's so broad, it's so banal, it's so big of a keyword, it doesn't help me in Google at all. And so keyword phrases in a topic or area like mine become more important. Well, that means they have to be in the body of your content. And I don't have a good workflow for working on that. One thing I tried was I took all the keyword phrases that either do well for me or that would do well for me, and I published them on my desktop. I made them as a background. And then I tried to set it up so that the window I'm writing in is on one half of my desktop, and then I can see that list while I'm writing. And that has some success. It would be better, however, if I could cut and paste those words. And so I'm still working on how I can do a better job of using especially keyword phrases. Some lessons that I've learned over this time, given that this blog grew out of Podcamp. One is, in terms of content and topics, I've done a pretty good job of picking the topics that are important to me and sticking with that. It's real easy to think that if you don't have the viewership that you want, the readership you want, to just start writing about more things. And that will become a problem for you because then you kind of dilute who you are to those people. So rather than go that route, take it the other direction. Think about focusing that content and your topics down. But make sure you're not saying the same thing over and over again. I have a good buddy who was a blogger in Indiana who stopped blogging last year. And he did because he was frustrated. He felt like he kept saying the same thing over and over again and nobody was listening. And that's because he was. He would just say, this is horrible, or this is horrible, or this is horrible, and that was it. That's as far as he got. And people only want to read, this is horrible, so many times, and then it has no impact whatsoever. So, what you do in your content, how you pick your topics, and what you have to say about them will have everything to do with how well what you do can grow. Post length. I do not have more or fewer viewers depending on how long that post is. And it's you know, you will have people say a blog post shouldn't be more than 500 words, whatever. I don't agree with that. I think if you write well and you have something important to say and you organize it well, you can write long blog posts. What I will tell you about post length, that from my experience, is that if you vary it, you will do much better. If you have some things that are short and some things that are long, you will do better. The more important than length, I think, is don't overthink and overwork a blog post. And I can be really guilty of this. So a blog post I wrote just recently did really, really well for me. I got so much feedback on it. It was really very positive. And that was about, the post was called Fairy Tales and Weddings. And it grew out of the fact that I had seen on LinkedIn, in a LinkedIn group, somebody asked about, what's your fairy tale wedding? And I saw that and I thought, you know, that's the problem. Weddings aren't about fairy tales. They're about real people making commitments to each other and all this stuff. And I was going to get negative about that, but I did, and I didn't have time. And but every time I get an update email from LinkedIn, there it is, and it keeps showing up in my face. And then a week or two ago, both Glee and Modern Family both had a theme about wedding proposals. And I watched both, and they were both kind of silly and over the top. And I got it in a new way. And I wrote a blog post that is about 550 words about seeing that on LinkedIn, about those two stories. I wrote it. It was written very quickly. It didn't take a lot of editing. Very simple idea, and it did so well for me. And it wasn't about the length. It was about that I didn't overthink it. It wasn't too complicated. It was simple enough that I could just spit it out and put it out there. So it isn't so much the length, but it is how easy it is to get it out and how easy it is for your readers to follow. In terms of blog design, I didn't really think about this until I started to organize this talk. You know, I moved from a free layout to a paid layout, which didn't cost very much money. And then I just left it there. And I've added to it a little bit, but I think blog design really requires you to do more than that. And that's, I think, a place where I don't think I've succeeded very well. I think you have to constantly evaluate, on a regular basis, evaluate what is your user experience of coming to whatever medium it is that you're doing, whether it's a blog or a podcast or whatever. If you look at my site, it's kind of a 3-column blog. There's some stuff on the left with some buttons, and then the content's in the middle, and then there's some navigational stuff and some things on the right. And there's just too much stuff there. It becomes bothersome. It becomes busy. It isn't easy. And so I'm going to be making some pretty big changes in the next month to that, because I think that that's interfering with my content. And I wouldn't have thought about that. I thought, you know, I have a design. It's like a newspaper. It's pretty good. No, you got to go farther than that. You have to get into it. You also have to, don't be afraid that you aren't enough of a geek. Even if you're not a geeky kind of person, there are some simple things you can learn about what's underneath the hood in WordPress or whatever blogging platform you use, and that can make all the difference in the world. In 5 years, I've only had one major catastrophe with my blog. And why it happened, we don't know. But one day I go and I open up the blog and it's broken. There's nothing showing up. But I call up my hosting provider and the database has become corrupted. Now, I was fortunate enough that a period of time before that, I needed to move my blog from one server at my hosting provider to another. And in the doing of that, I began to use a plugin called WordPress Backup that automatically every night makes a backup and saves it. Well, fortunately, I had that, but I didn't know what to do with it. I learned, however, that I could get my site back up and running with that backup file. It was pretty simple. At one time, I would have been too afraid to try to do anything like that, but it got me back up and running. The other piece about this geeky stuff that I think is a story to relate. So a way I used to post back in those early days when I had more and more people coming to the site was that notion of I would see something, I would post to my blog via email. You know, WordPress you can set up so that you can email to the blog post and it becomes a post. So I would read something, I would write 4 or 5 sentences about it, and then I would send that via email off and it would show up on the blog. Then one day that stopped really working for me. And it just happens that one day was about the same time I moved to my new theme. Because there's something in the way the news theme that I'm using doesn't like to read my email. And so my email would include div tags or something that would throw off the format of the page. So what did I do? I quit sending emails. Here's a workflow that worked for me. It produced good content that people read, but instead of fixing the geek side of it, I changed my workflow. No, that's kind of like backwards. Rather than stopping a workflow that was successful and fixing the geek part, I should have fixed the geek part so that my workflow was still successful. So don't be afraid that you aren't enough of a geek. You can learn this. I learned it. It can work for you. Then my last point here is adjust your blog so that it works for you. Don't find just a good process that fits whatever your software, your platform restrictions are. Change that software and platform restrictions if it doesn't work with your workflow. Because your content really is the most important thing. It's the thing that you want to share. So if you kind of throttle it in because of something else, you're going to be working against yourself. Expectations. Know what you consider to be your goals, and then how do you decide if you're meeting those? Even if I didn't admit it, one of my goals was that I was going to have 100,000 page views by now. Well, you've got to be able to admit what your goals are and then evaluate how you're doing against them. Don't just go around telling yourself and other people you're being successful just to do that. I mean, we all want to put on a good face, but be clear with yourself and with somebody else how you're doing, and then if you're not getting there, what do you want to do about it? You can take a break and your blog isn't going to die. I've posted almost nothing in August. My readership didn't go away. They came right back when I started posting again. My numbers are down for the whole year because I lost some time, but it didn't kill me. It didn't kill my blog. You can take some time off. I think one of the things we do in the social media or blogging or podcasting world is we think if we don't keep putting out new content, the world's going to come crashing down. Well, eventually it will. But at some point, you can take a breath. You can take a break. You can switch up what you do. It isn't the worst thing in the world. And you've got to take a break to figure out what's not working for you and how to turn that around. And the last thing I want to talk about here is social media. So social media has changed a lot. There's been some really good sessions here on social media. If you haven't been in them, watch the video afterwards, because there have been some really great stuff. Social media has changed so much in the past 5 years. Twitter 5 years ago, fewer people were using. Now lots and lots of people are using it. I still use Twitter. I still put everything out that I do on Twitter. I have interactions with people. I've got friends on Twitter. That's how we communicate. But there's also a real problem with social media and Twitter. So recently, I wrote a blog post about an op-ed I read in theadvocate.com. It was a woman in Philadelphia who wrote about same-sex marriage in Pennsylvania. And it started by her saying, if you want to get married in Pennsylvania, you better move away to another state. And I thought, oh boy, where's this going to go? This person then went on to say that Pennsylvania has the most draconian marriage laws in the country. No, that's not true. And then went on to say that the only Democratic county in Pennsylvania is Philadelphia. And I thought, what? So I took that blog post, her op-ed, and I wrote about it. And I pointed out all the things that I felt were a problem. And she had titled her op-ed, The Problem with Pennsylvania. Now I titled my blog post, The Problem with Pennsylvania, in parentheses, is people like Victoria. So that goes out on Twitter. And I of course, took her Twitter account and made sure she got copied on it. And this big, brouhaha erupted because all her Twitter followers were pissed off at me. Nobody went and actually read, a few people did, but most people didn't go and read the actual blog post. They just took that title, what was on Twitter, and that became a point of contention and discussion. You can't mistake social media for your blogging. The blog is what's the important piece, not all this little brouhaha, BS, catty stuff that happens out there. The same thing happens with Facebook. You put something up on Facebook and you watch for how many people like it. Well, it doesn't really matter how many people like it. Liking is so easy. You just click a button. It means nothing. So don't get hung up in your social media presence thinking that it's going to get people to your blog. All it's going to do is keep people in social media. And that's okay. There's a place for social media, but the two are not the same, and they can actually fight each other. So use social media to publicize, but think about how you use it. So if I were going to do that tweet about my blog post about that op-ed in The Advocate, I would change that title of it such that maybe I get more people to actually read the blog post that I wrote before they decided to just blow up on Twitter about they didn't like the title. Does that make sense? And I see this happening a lot. And so pay attention to how you're using your social media and what it's doing in terms of your blog.
And break is spelled B-R-E-A-K.
Okay. See, I told you I'm a horrible speller. Blogging requires a couple of things. It requires having an opinion and enough ego that you're willing to put it out there. It requires enough ego to stand behind whatever you put out there, whether people like it or they don't like it. It requires time. If you don't have enough of this, you got to figure out how you're going to get it. It also requires a certain amount of naivete. You've got to just do it without being so afraid or thinking you have to have it all figured out ahead of time. If you don't just jump in, you may not get there. And that's all I really want to say. That's my blog over the past 5 years. Are there any questions?
I have a question. Did you ever try to facilitate any sort of relationships with other blogs that had kind of like maybe doing a guest post on theirs and then they do one on yours? And if so, did that work out? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I said you have a pretty extensive blog that you have a relationship with.
Yeah, I do. And I think that, you will see content marketers talk about doing guest blog posts as a way to grow. And I think that works for some kinds of blogs. For me, it wasn't unsuccessful, but it also didn't become anything that really helped me grow a whole lot. But I think that's a valuable thing to do. I work in educational technology for the School of Pharmacy at Pitt.
Are you presenting here? Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I'll ask another one. I mean, you had mentioned that you'd like to get to a point where you're making enough money from your blog to kind of self-sustain it so you can do it full time. Have you tried doing anything to monetize it by ads or referrals or anything like that?
It's a great question. I have not done anything to try to monetize my blog by ads or referrals. I have been approached by a few people over time. Would you put a link to this, or would you put an ad for this, and I'll pay you this much money? And I have evaluated each of those, made a decision about whether I would or wouldn't. One thing that I really dislike when you look at gay and lesbian blogs out there is that they're just covered with ads for, underwear and all kinds of crap. Sue Kerr is here today. I don't know where she is right now. She does Pittsburgh Lesbian Correspondence. Wonderful blog. Sue and I disagree a lot, and we fight about things, but we both have great respect for what each other does. When I go to Sue's blog, Pittsburgh Lesbian Correspondence, I see this ad for some male underwear company because it's because of using Google ads or one of those kinds of things. It knows who I am. And so it masters the ads to fit the client. And I don't want that. I want the content to shine through. So I mentioned Andrew Sullivan. He has no ads on his blog. And so I have chosen not to do that. He does. Andrew Sullivan last year went independent, and his content is free, but you can subscribe to it for something like $60 a year or $30 a year. It's not a huge amount of money. And he, in the course of the first few days, raised oodles and oodles and oodles of money through a subscription plan like that. Now, I haven't done anything like that because I'm really teeny. He probably has 100,000 page views a day, where I'm at 35,000 in a year. So I'm not big enough to pull anything like that off. But I do think that's a model that is a good way to go. I'm just not big enough to make that happen yet. Other questions? Well, thank you for coming. Check out my stuff. Send me any feedback or comments that you have, and I'm glad you were here today. Thanks.
Will you be in person